Exclusive live eye from the news centers only on WSAZ Television 3.
WSAZ Television 3's regular programming is being preempted at this time so that we may bring you the following. Live from the Charleston Marriott Town Center in Charleston, West Virginia, WSAZ Television 3 News presents the West Virginia Associated Press Broadcasters Gubernatorial Debate. Now here's Lauren Tovia and Clint McElroy.
Good evening, and welcome to the West Virginia Gubernatorial Debate, sponsored by the West Virginia Associated Press Broadcasters. We're at the Charleston Marriott Hotel. I'm Lauren Tovia, and I'll be moderating this debate along with Clint McElroy, who's the president of the West Virginia APB. Clint?
All right, Lauren, here's how it's going to work this evening. Each candidate is going to make a 5-minute opening statement. Afterwards, we're going to ask the candidates questions collected before the broadcast and during the broadcast from the audience here at the Marriott. And the candidate will have 3 minutes for his answer. His opponent will then have 3 minutes for a response, to be followed by the first candidate taking a minute for a rebuttal. Now, we will alternate the order on the questions until the allotted time runs out. We will then follow that with a 3-minute closing statement from each candidate. Now, the order was determined by a coin toss just before airtime. Our first opening statement will come from candidate C.
Clyde C., at 42 years of age, is a native of Moorfield, West Virginia. He has served for 10 years in the West Virginia House of Delegates, the past 6 as Speaker of the...
My name is Clyde C. I'm the Democratic nominee for governor. When I decided to enter the governor's race about 18 months ago, I was generally described by many of the press that 18 months. I worked many days, 18 hours a day, and when the smoke cleared on June 5, I won 44 of 55 counties, and I outdistanced my nearest opponent by some 44,000 votes. I was born and have lived my entire life in West Virginia. I live in Moorfield. My wife's name is Judy. We have 4 children, Jennifer, Josh, Lucas, and Amy. All of them attend the public schools in Hardy County. I am an attorney by profession, and I've had a general law practice in Moorfield for the past 14 years. As mentioned, I have served the past 10 years in West Virginia House of Delegates, representing Hardy and Pendleton and portions of Randolph and Hampshire County. I have served 6 years as Speaker of the House. I have served during good times and bad times in government. I have served when we were arguing over how we were going to spend surplus dollars, and I have served when we have had to pick and choose between very vital programs. These are some of my formal credentials. But what I would like to do this evening is to briefly share some very personal things about myself. Like most West Virginians, I was born in a holla. My holla just happened to be in Hardy County. My father was a farm tenant. My mother was a school teacher. I'm told that she was a very outstanding and a very extraordinary woman. She was killed in a bus accident when I was 5 years of age. I grew up with an aunt and uncle. I worked in the hayfields on a farm and performed the chores of rural West Virginia. I, like many other young people during the late 50s, was looking for somewhere to go. Job opportunities were few. I was a high school dropout at age 16 and opted to enter the military service. I served 3.5 years in the Army, and during that time I obtained a high school equivalency diploma. I returned home to West Virginia and worked my way through 4 years of undergraduate school at West Virginia University and 3 years of law school. Those are some of the things that have molded me. Those are some of the things that give me my values and the experiences that I will bring to the governor's office. I consider myself to be fiercely independent. I believe in lean, tough, efficient government. I am a fiscal conservative who believes the taxpayers ought to receive something for their money. I believe in basic human rights. I believe that education and improving education is the ultimate solutions to many of the long-term problems in West Virginia. I'm a volunteer fireman. I'm an avid hunterman and a fisherman. I like bluegrass music and country ham sandwiches. And I have kids with cavities, and I have monthly mortgages and car payments, and I have struggled with all of the things that I think the day-to-day West Virginian struggles with. I think my educational background, I think my experience in government, and I think the personal qualities that I will bring to the governor's office and my experience uniquely qualifies me to be the next governor of the state of West Virginia.
Arch Moore is a Glendale, West Virginia native. He is also was a former member of the West Virginia House of Delegates in 1953 to 55, a member of the United States House of Representatives from 1957 to 1969, and a two-term governor of the state of West Virginia from 1969 to 1977. Mr. Moore.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate very much the Associated Press broadcasters giving us the opportunity to talk to our fellow West Virginians. You know, when one begins to translate their abilities and their capacities to serve a constituency as large as 1,900,000 people in the state of West Virginia, there is a great deal in common, probably in our beginnings and in our very roots. I'm a child of the Depression. I know what it is to have the lights turned off in the house and have a measure of uncomfortableness in terms of the manner in which your schoolmates either view you or assess you as a person or an individual. And yet the proudness that existed within the breast of my family is something that I've carried all my life. It's made me sort of a people person, having a genuine interest in the difficulties, the aspirations, and the dreams of individuals progressing and moving in this great, great nation of ours. You know, I worked for a long period of time during my high school years seating people in a theater as an usher. It was a way to sort of supplant the family income. During my senior year in high school, I held an 8-hour job in a factory. I left that not by any choice of my own, because Uncle Sam called me to service in World War II. I like to think that that basic call, probably more than anything else, brought about the defeat of Hitler, but I'm anxious to share it with millions of other young Americans. Coming out of there with a great intensity and belief in this nation of ours, I began my college education, West Virginia University. Both my undergraduate and law degrees are from that institution. It was there again that I felt a broader community of interest of the individual and the person. I began my service in the West Virginia legislature and then to the Congress of the United States, and been pleased to have been elected by my fellow West Virginians to serve for a period of 8 years as its governor. In this election, we're talking about the future of West Virginia. We're deeply concerned in terms of that which is the condition of the minds that exist in our state. West Virginians are genuinely concerned about their future, their opportunities economically, the jobs that they now have, and keeping the family unit together, which is historically a great part of our heritage. It is in that particular regard that I think jobs must have and necessarily be the #1 priority in this campaign. The regeneration of our economics so that those opportunities can be here for our families and those individuals within the family unit. We read daily of a deterioration of the economic base of our state. We find that jobs are leaving us in great numbers. I do not desire, nor will I, preside over a further deterioration of the economics of the state of West Virginia. I'll do everything that I possibly can to regenerate the economic base, put West Virginians back to work in a mixture of job opportunities. They say that we must, in some sense, forget a portion of our state, that coal is the history of our past, that we should concentrate on other endeavors. I like to believe that under proper leadership and proper guidance, that coal could very much be a part of the history of our future. We must bring together a community discussion and dialogue in this particular regard. Failure on our part to do that will isolate 16 to 18 coal-producing counties in our state, make them dependent upon the balance of the economy of the state of West Virginia, and give them and their families very little hope for the future. There are many other aspects that have to have attention and high priority in the life of this state of ours. Education certainly must be the challenge of our generation. It is suggested that a qualitative education program is the prime responsibility of state government. I do not suggest for a moment that that is not so. I believe in the general revenue area, it should have and command the #1 priority of our dollars. But as you look at the state of West Virginia today, that deep and abiding concern for the future in our state is something that consumes us all. Under very strong leadership, West Virginia can move ahead in these next years.
The first question concerns jobs. Some say that West Virginia's unemployment rate is the biggest issue facing both of the candidates. Candidates, what specific proposals do you have to curb?
Regard West Virginians as a group and as a group of citizens are not aware that in these past 8 years, we changed our direction on industrial development in our state. We went from a business-oriented, independent concept of location of plant in West Virginia to a purchase-type economic life. That is, you offered low-cost loans to whoever you could entice to come into your state. That type of economic program finds itself directly in conflict with the economic programs in every other state in the Union. It also permits the injection of the political process in the decision as to who gets those low-cost loans. Early in my first administration, I provided for a tax investment credit program that induced industries to add to existing plant, that encouraged them to come and invest with us, permitting them to regain the capital investment, permitting them to offset against their capital investment the tax exposure that they had. Early in this new administration, that philosophy of economic development changed, and the inducement to the private sector was completely changed, 180 degrees as a matter of fact, and you began to see that the interest in West Virginia was not as enthusiastic as it had been in the past. As a matter of fact, in those 8 years, we had $4.6 billion worth of industrial development in our state. That meant jobs and job opportunities, and that did fuel the treasury of our state with significant amounts of tax dollars in order for us to meet the commitments and the challenges which were ours in those particular years. If you inject into an economic development program the political process, meaning those with the most political muscle, participate in the dollars in the state treasury, you're going to find that business, responsible business, will stay away from you. I prefer to let those that can make their own decision, that is the businessman or the investor himself, to come into the state of West Virginia on his own decision, take advantage of an investment credit program so that he might, in that particular instance, be the sole arbiter of whether or not he invests in our state. That will regenerate the economic life of our state.
Mr. C., what specific proposals do you have to curb West Virginia's rising unemployment?
Well, of course, I think it's first appropriate to say that all of us in West Virginia want better education, all of us in West Virginia want better highways, we want better public services. But I think all of those beg the more fundamental question of where do we get the revenues to provide those services with, and the answer and the only answer is jobs. I have, throughout the primary election, continuously talked about the fact that the only way we're going to have a healthy employment situation in West Virginia is to have healthy employers. And the only way we're going to have healthy employers in West Virginia is to make West Virginia more competitive. I introduced the resolution that created the Tax Study Commission, which compared all of the taxes of the state of West Virginia with taxes in other states, and particularly our neighboring states. That Tax Study Commission submitted its final report near the end of the legislative session this past year, and it indicated that West Virginia does not have a very conventional tax system, that it does not have a very dependable tax system. I have and will continue to advocate that we take the necessary steps to make our taxes competitive. I advocate the repeal and substitution of the business and occupation tax. I think we have to be honest with the voters of our state that it brings in too many dollars to simply throw it to the wind, but the goal certainly ought to be to switch as much of those taxes to a more progressive base and to give our people an opportunity, particularly small businesses beginning and wanting to expand, an opportunity to make a profit before they're imposed with taxes on their gross receipts. I feel very strongly that the governor of our state today has made all types of attempt to attract new industries, and I've not always agreed with that. But in fairness, I think it is inaccurate for Arch to indicate here tonight that we in any way did away with the investment credit. The investment credit for manufacturing, which was introduced and passed some years ago, was full of a great big loophole. We changed it and blocked that loophole, and it was my opponent who recommended to the legislature at his first term of office that taxes be increased very dramatically upon manufacturing. So that 10% per year investment credit for manufacturing still exists, and I think it's misleading for him to indicate otherwise.
Mr. Moore, you have 1 minute for rebuttal.
Well, may I simply say that all you have to do is go to the statutes. Statutes indicate that the tax investment credit program came on the books in April of 1969, July 1969, effective at that particular time. It was materially altered in April 1978. People call it loopholes. I call it the best opportunity for jobs to find an excuse to exit the state of West Virginia, and that's what's happened. Now, I can appreciate there is sensitivity to this because we see progress all around us. In our sister states and the adjacent economies seem to be moving and growing quite well. But we in West Virginia are dead in the water. And I believe we're dead in the water because of the attitude of the governor, the attitude of the legislature, having very much an anti-investment attitude. And it is in that particular regard that I think if you examine it very closely, circumstances with a 400% increase in taxes in that period of time,
Thank you,
ought
Mr.
to tell
Moore.
you the answer.
Since the REC decision, education has become a major issue in the state. We have a two-part question we would like you to address. What you plan to improve education in the future, and perhaps specifically tell us what specific goals you have concerning higher education. We'll start with Mr. C.
Well, first of all, as to education generally, again, I have been talking very much about the fact that we need to increase the quality of education in our state. When I went on the campaign trail initially and pointed out to the people of our state when many of our high school graduates can't read a morning newspaper that there's something wrong with the educational system. When we have 5,000 or more dropouts annually, there's something wrong with the educational system. I think we have to get back to basics in education. I think we have to increase the basic units of science, math, reading, and writing to provide our students with a better fundamental background to go forward. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a high school dropout. Now, we can talk about having an educated workforce as long as we want to, but with 5,000 dropouts every year from the high schools of West Virginia, multiply that by 10 or 20 years and look at the number of people who are going to be in our workforce which are not educated. I was one of the lucky ones. How many of those 5,000 a year are likely to end up with law degrees? Very few of them, I suspect. So I think education needs to attract better quality of teachers. I believe in better evaluation of teachers. I believe in better evaluation of students. I think we have to improve in-service training for all of our teachers and to help them, help our children be educated. In a higher education, the answer is like most other things. The solution really is money. Our schools don't rank very well with the salaries that they pay to our professors. We don't rank very well with the quality of programs that we offer. The answer is more money. For those who aren't aware of it, we have been continually decreasing the portion of funds going to higher education on an annual basis. And certainly that has to be reversed. We are going to have to turn it around. We're going to have to provide more money to higher education, and that in turn is going to provide a better system.
Mr. Moore, your response to the question of dealing with improving education in the state and perhaps focusing in specifically on higher education.
Well, I want to congratulate my opponent for the frankness in the discussion of his particular educational experiences. I wish well that there would be an awful lot of young West Virginians that could have and feel that type of a dramatic personal turnaround. However, again, government on the state basis still has the basic responsibility in the education field. That's where the leadership must come from. It is a combination of the working components of government. The governor proposes, the legislature disposes. In that particular regard, I think that we've got to address both the elementary and secondary field of education in increasing the qualitativeness of education. Now, whether that means placing the blame on a particular teacher because Johnny has not fared well in school remains, in my judgment, to be evaluated and to be determined as to whether or not it is a fair evaluation of our educational system. Whether or not with 5,000 dropouts in our elementary and secondary educational program is basically a responsibility of that professional educator. I think part of that has got to belong in the home, in the family environment. But having said that, one of the real dramatic areas of difficulty in our state is in the field of higher education. Circumstances in most of our colleges and universities today is that we are an itinerant educational way stop for individuals on the way up in professional education or on the way down. And that's not to diminish their contribution if their enthusiasm as a young professor is contributing, or in a sense the wisdom of age that is there as they are moving out to perhaps a retirement environment. The circumstances are such that we cannot keep and we cannot maintain a qualitative higher education system and be in the ranking that we're in. If you look at the two basic areas of education, elementary and secondary, yes, it is right. We're 48th, 49th, or 50th. A really embarrassing comparison. If you look at the southern region of which we're a part, in higher education, you find that we are at the bottom in terms of our state's commitment to higher education. Now that ought to tell you that those in positions of leadership have had not the priorities that must be established if we're going to get education in the qualitative atmosphere that it must move.
And a 1-minute rebuttal, Mr. C.
Well, very briefly, I would simply observe that much of the problems with education today have resulted from the Reagan administration. You know, we are being asked to do more and more with these so-called block grants with less and less money. And I think that's tantamount to the elimination of the programs which are critical to the people of our state. Now, we need to attract better people as teachers. We're not going to have sound education unless we have sound teachers. We need for teachers to have whatever incentives are necessary to bring them out of other professions into teaching again to educate children.
Mr. Moore, everywhere you go in this state, people complain about the roads, saying that the roads are in horrible condition. What specific plans do you have to improve the efficiency of the Department of Highways?
Well, may I simply say to my fellow West Virginians in that regard and confirm the major thrust of your question. Wherever you go in the state of West Virginia, there is discussion about the condition of our highway system, and they're particularly talking about the primary and secondary road system. It is in that particular area that the emphasis has completely been lost. And the translation that that inferior road system makes to individuals coming within the state, whether it's just for vacation purposes, whether it is you and I going to and from work, or whether the circumstances might be just traveling through, it's a translation of the emphasis and the priorities that we West Virginians have on our highway system. In the General Revenue Fund, or excuse me, in the Highway User Tax Fund, the devotion of those particular dollars to the improvement of our highway system is fundamental if we're going to correct the condition of our highway system. As governor of West Virginia, if that be the decision of my fellow West Virginians, I have to have an $80 to $90 million annual program for the primary and secondary road system of this state. Now, some will suggest, well, Arch, where you're going to get it? Well, I don't know what's up there in that Capitol right today. I don't know how they're running this road department. All I know is the sense of professionalism that was built into it has materially eroded. Now, some will say that, that today we're running a highway system with half the employees that were there some 7 or 8 years ago. Well, my fellow West Virginians, I can even reduce it further. I can take it down to 1 employee, nothing but a highway commissioner. And if that's going to be the reflection of the condition of the highways, it's going to be basically what you're seeing out there today. You can't treat Hyde County right now. Only want to get your confidence today because, you see, you have to make a decision in about 4 months as to the next administration. Oh, you'll get them surveying and they'll be putting the flags out there. You're going to get excited. You're going to run in the house. You're going to tell Marie that, my gosh, the survey crews are out there. And Marie's going to look at you and say, John, they were there 4 years ago, and we've got the same road we've had for the last 20. Now, the circumstances are such that we've got to treat this primary and secondary system in our state on an annual basis. Those dollars have got to be within that highway budget. And I believe, if given the opportunity, I can put this highway system of ours back in the Class AA condition it was in when I left it in 1977.
Mr. C., what plans do you have to improve the efficiency of the Department of Highways?
Well, let me first of all say to you, Arch, since you don't know what it is like up at the Capitol now, I'd like to tell you. Since the Reagan administration has come to power, we don't have all of those federal highway dollars coming in to stuff the state coffers as you experienced when you were governor. We don't have Senators Byrd and Randolph in a position to create Appalachian Region commissions to do those things for us. We don't have the luxury of building highways as you did when they were free. When I say they were free, 90% of the money came from the federal government, and the balance of it came from bonds that all West Virginians are going to be 25 years older when they're paid off. So that's the situation that we have. What we need to help roads in West Virginia is a change of administration in Washington, another look at West Virginia. In the first year that Ronald Reagan served, our revenues coming in here from the federal government were decreased $169 million. That was the situation. Those are the situations that we inherited. Now, we were able to have the best road program ever in 1977, and we passed some gasoline taxes to do it, and we didn't have complaints from the people. As far as paving the roads before elections, that was one of your old tricks, and Democrats learned it well from you. You used to pave every time there was an election. But unfortunately, you put down those little skimmy coats, and then as soon as you left office, they deteriorated. They cracked open. The water went into them, and when they froze, construction. Well, solution to the highway problem is like solution to a lot of other problems. We need the economy turned around. We need 110,000 West Virginians back to work, buying more cars, burning more gasoline, and generally spending more money. That will provide the revenues. We do need a bond proposal, and I was very interested to see today that the Republican Platform Committee is recommending a $1 billion bond proposal. The same Republicans in the state of West Virginia who went out and fought tooth and nail against a $750 million bond proposal just a few years ago. Well, we do need bond proposals, but we were left with a big debt also. Of all those bonds that you left us with, Arch, went clear up to $88 million a year in debt service we had to pay. I still think it was a good deal. We need the bonds again, but the solution is the economy, and that will fix highways and to get rid of Reaganomics.
Mr. Moore, 1 minute for rebuttal.
Sort of tickles me the way the opposition always place their inadequacies on somebody else. They're not willing to accept the responsibility for themselves. 97% of every dollar in our school system in West Virginia comes from your West Virginia dollar. A very small portion of it comes out of the federal government, and don't let any politician tell you otherwise. And in the highway system, I'll put the thickness of my asphalt against the thickness of any asphalt that's been laid down in this state of West Virginia and its qualitative aspects of it. You don't have to worry about that. Those Archmore roads are still out there and you're still traveling on them. But you know, it's really interesting when we get down to the question of the fact 160. You realize, my fellow West Virginians, that the first 10 months of that new administration was operating under a budget that had been adopted and enacted by the previous administration. The budgetary process of the United States did not change until October 1981.
Both candidates have focused on integrity in their advertising campaigns so far in the campaign. Please elaborate on this issue and tell us if you think this is one that should be important to the voters. And we start with Mr. C.
When any person seeks the highest office in this state, certainly I consider integrity not only to be a relevant issue, but one of major consideration. Arch and I both have long public records and I think they will be reviewed and scrutinized by the people of this state as they should be. I think that I have a record of voting on some 5,000 issues, and I'm sure that they will be picked at and looked at, and people will form opinions about me. However, I do not think that anyone will be pointing to anything of which would constitute a breach of public trust. On the other hand, I think my opponent, who I think is perhaps the world champion of unanswered questions, owes to the people of West Virginia explanations about a lot of his conduct and a lot of his dealings during the 8 years that he served as governor of this state. I think he owes to the people of this state an explanation as to the hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash that his attorney admitted that he had in his desk drawer, which was unexplained, where it came from, who it came from, what it was received in consideration for, and actually what happened to it. I think he owes to the voters of this state an explanation as to why his liquor commissioner went to the penitentiary for shaking down liquor companies for some $50,000 for campaign contributions that apparently were never reported. I think he owes an explanation to the voters of this state as to why at the midnight hour of his term he settled a $100 million lawsuit for $1 million and a tax $1 million to pick that up. I think he owes an explanation to the people of this state as to why he awarded a license plate contract to an Arkansas firm headed up by a person who was a convicted bribe payer. I think he owes an explanation to the people of this state as to why he pardoned 75 criminals, 5 of whom were convicted murderers who did not, or the people of our state did not want on the street. And each time over the years that he's been asked these questions, he always responds by saying, I have answered those questions before. And I and most of West Virginia, I don't think I've ever heard the answers to them, and I don't know in 3 minutes if he can explain it all, but I'm going to keep asking the questions until I get some kind of answers.
I hope you do.
Mr. Moore, your response to the question of dealing with focusing on integrity in the campaign so far and whether or not this is an issue.
The opposition thinks this is the only way that they can be successful in their candidacy. The manner in which they want to conduct their campaign, my fellow West Virginians, is entirely up to them. All of the areas in which my opponent enumerated, which sort of indicated to me that he really anticipated the question because they were all written down, the circumstances really are easy for an individual to project. But my fellow West Virginians, I stood the test and the fire. And under our system, even a dropout lawyer ought to know this. When somebody says, not your responsibility, not you, sir. Under our system of justice, it writes pretty much, if there's a sense of fairness, really the end to an issue in these particular areas and regard. I sort of believe, certainly, that scrutiny should be there. I'll stand that test any time. I want my opponent to tell us when he's going to identify the banks that he borrowed money from in a primary campaign, who the signers are on those particular notes, in order that we might know if he has an obligation before he can go into office. I think we ought to look at some other really areas that might really pose in West Virginians' minds. Areas that perhaps questions could be posed and answers must be forthcoming. You know, as a legislator, you can sort of pack it in on both sides. As a speaker, you don't move legislation unless the contributions come in. And all you have to do is look at the trail and you'll get it established. And then you can make up your mind, my fellow West Virginians, as to where you want to invest the future of this state. And the leadership that has the capacity and the ability to move it out of the morass that is in the present time. Provide it the direction and the hope and the promise for the future. But whether or not you're going to let these matters that have long been the matters of favorite journalists and favorite politicians occupy your evaluation of Arch Moore.
And 1 minute rebuttal, Mr. C.
Well, my 1 minute rebuttal, I want to get through as quickly as possible because this is the first opportunity we've really seen an opportunity to contrast the two candidates. I borrowed my campaign money from the Charleston National Bank, unsecured. I borrowed money from the Bank of Dunbar, which was endorsed by Mr. J.C. Dillon and Mr. Wiley Stowers. We had 14 other endorsers on the note. The bank said they didn't want it. That is the basic difference between Clyde C. and Arch Moore. You asked me how I did something, and I will tell you. It's disclosed on my financial statements. I don't have it in cash in a drawer unexplained.
Both candidates, first to Mr. Moore, what are your feelings about a state lottery, and if you support the idea, where would you like to see the money go? Mr. Moore.
Well, I really appreciate that question because West Virginia is going to have to respond to it. But Clyde, you don't see on your reporting scheme as what I see. There's nothing about where you borrowed your money, nothing about who your co-signers are, nothing as it reflects to the law. The lottery is a situation, an amendment, which is on this ballot, that causes all West Virginians to pause and reflect just a moment of what their feelings might be. I personally don't feel comfortable with the question of a lottery, but every one of our adjacent states have adopted laws that provide for a lottery, the operation of that lottery in their respective states. A lot of West Virginians are participating in it. I believe that if we look at the lottery amendment and under strong, positive leadership, take the dollars that is generated from that particular amendment and dedicate it in the area of our highest need and our highest priority, education, for example, or into our highway system, I conclude that I've got to be in support of the lottery amendment. The circumstances are such that we West Virginians do not know, nobody I don't believe can represent to you, how much money is actually embraced within this particular amendment. Whether it will yield $35 million to our revenues, or whether it is in the area of $50 million, or it could very well be less. The fact remains that if we can dedicate those particular lottery revenues, I would be in support of the lottery amendment. We're facing a problem in West Virginia with the particular tax legislation that expires in, I believe, April of 1985. We're going to lose approximately $35 to $40 million into the revenue flow of our state. There's got to be some considerations given in that particular regard. In terms of finding a replacement for that, taxes today are unconscionably high in our state, both on the individual and certainly on business. This is confirmed apparently by the legislative task force in the area of comparing our relative tax bases. So I have to say to you that while there may be a reluctance upon my part, there may be a distaste for a lottery amendment, I support that particular amendment.
Mr. C., your thoughts on a state lottery, and if you support it, where would you like to see the revenue go?
Thank you, but first of all, again, Arch, the cash. Where did you get the cash? What did you spend it for? What did you give up to get the cash? I think the people of West Virginia have a right to know. As for the lottery, that's cash too, maybe to a lot of our people. But the lottery is something that's inevitable. I started off many years ago thinking that a lottery probably wasn't a good idea because it probably preyed on those who could least afford it, because people, gambling being a disease that might very well deprive children from food, might very well deprive families from necessities. But I have come to realize that the lottery that exists in Maryland, in Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and all the surrounding states is each day reaching into our state and taking out voluntary revenues that could be received by the state of West Virginia. Again, I like to be candid, and the candid answer is I don't think a West Virginia lottery is going to be particularly profitable. A lot of people see it as a panacea, as a solution to all the road problems, as a solution to all the funding problems. But I think that's very, very unlikely. We have estimates ranging anywhere from $3 to $8 or $10 or $12 million, and obviously that's significant revenue, and we can put it to good use. I think all of the public opinion polls show that the people of our state want it. I think it's going to pass overwhelmingly, and the next governor of West Virginia is going to have to implement a lottery so that it can be run cleanly, openly, and hopefully profitably.
Mr. Moore.
Well, I think generally we agree in this particular area as it relates specifically to the question of what a lottery will yield. There is just such a broad difference between those that have evaluated this and the circumstances in which we anticipate the revenue that might flow. I just simply say, as I've indicated, that I would support the lottery if we can dedicate those particular lottery funds to specific high priority areas, particularly education and particularly highways.
Right, due to a time shortage, we are going to go with an abbreviated format for this last question, if it's acceptable to everyone. A 2-minute answer with a 2-minute rebuttal, a two-minute response and a 1-minute rebuttal. The question is this: what do you feel you can do about the low self-esteem factor that seems to characterize many of the residents of West Virginia? And we'll start over here. I believe we started last time here. We start over here, Mr. C.
Repeat the question, please.
What would you do about the low self-esteem factor that seems to characterize many West Virginians?
Well, of course, I think West Virginia is a very diversified state, and while there is a low esteem factor in various parts of the state, I think part of it is really physical. As I have traveled throughout West Virginia, and as I have looked through the creeks filled with bed springs and Clorox bottles, as I have talked to people, when people don't have pride in or feel good about themselves and what they do, there is a low esteem. There is a feeling of being suppressed and depressed. One of the things that I hope to do in this campaign and as governor is to propose a $5 million cleanup proposal for West Virginia to rid our state of some of these eyesores. I think if we can do that, if we can provide a quality education, if we can continue to have quality services and give our people something to take a great deal of pride in, then the natural consequences of that is that pride will be reinstated.
Mr. Moore.
I think your question is a fair question in terms of the evaluation of the mind of West Virginians. There seems to be a circumstance that exists among us that when we get down on ourselves, we really get down. We get down in terms of not only our personal evaluations, but we get down in terms of our hopes for the future. We don't see things happening in a positive sense as we compare them with other states. We find that our opportunities are not there or are not as valid as perhaps we would like for them to be. I began to try to rid the landscape of this state of some significant part of its visual pollution and junk cars. In doing that, I advanced the political career of a lesser-known individual of the opposite party. But nevertheless, the circumstances were such that the job had to be done. There seemed to be more pride in putting an automobile on 4 cinder blocks out in front of the house than moving it to the junk heap or wherever the case might be. All of this is degrading to those who visually evaluate us. But again, it still translates itself into leadership. You've got to make these individuals believe in themselves again and believe that opportunities are here. And I believe under good, strong leadership, we can re-establish that pride in our state and the belief that the good things can happen here.
And Mr. C, a 1-minute rebuttal.
Well, again, I don't think there's really much to rebut. I think that Arch and I are pretty much in agreement of the fact that the best way that we can reinstill a feeling of goodness about ourselves and our fellow mountaineers is to help them upgrade themselves in every area of life. And if we succeed in doing that, I think they're going to feel a lot better about themselves.
Okay. Will your administration put as much emphasis on tourism as the current administration is placing on it?
We began early giving our attention to the question of tourism. I certainly believe that it is a contributing factor in, if we can nurture and build it into increasing the economic base of our state. I think it has one real factor that can contribute basically to the state that perhaps another identity or industry per se could do, and that is it can attack the problems of our state in terms of its oneness, and I mean West Northerners or Southerners. And we've got to begin to think about this state in terms of the oneness of our people. Tourism does give us the opportunity to expose those portions of our state that reflect certainly positively, but at the same time our job creating endeavors. We built significantly and added significantly to the park system in our state. We've got to refine that. We've got to move to enhance our opportunities to capture the skiing industry off the eastern seaboard. And there are many aspects of it, and we would place certainly a high emphasis on tourism as we did previously, and the establishment of tourist councils, which were a part of the beginning of this renaissance in tourism.
How much emphasis, Mr. C., would your administration place on tourism?
Well, of course, I would place an awful lot of emphasis on tourism, and particularly in various parts of the state. I think the goal ought to be to make the eastern counties the resort capital of the East Coast. Certainly we have the high mountains, the north slopes, a lot of ski potential. When I talk about the tourism business, though, I think in terms a lot of small businesses, of motels, of hotels, of restaurants, of family service stations, and of all the support businesses that benefit by having tourists visit our state, and it, again, is revenue from outside, revenues that are otherwise not available to us. I have, throughout the primary campaign, stated, and again, in all candor, I voted to abolish the Department of Commerce, and upon reflection, I think that was a mistake. I think it has not received the type of emphasis that I would like to be, it being tourism. I advocate the reestablishment of the Department of Commerce. I think that we need to do a lot of other things, perhaps including placing the state parks within that Department of Commerce, and again, taking advantage of the things which are have been given to us by the good Lord, and try to make some dollars to help the public services that are crying out for monies in our state.
Mr. Moore?
Well, I think that in this particular area, we're both looking positively in this direction as a possibility to filling part of the void that exists in the economic fabric of our state. There are lots of suggestions as to how you approach this, but again, I want to reemphasize that the distribution of our state park system is such that if it's added to and if it's certainly maintained, and I've got a serious question in my mind about the maintenance of our state park system today, that we might be in the position that this is generating a negative reflection upon the state. We have to address the rehabilitation of our state park system to add to that facet of tourism.
Okay, we do not have enough time for any further questions. We do have time for closing statements, which we do have a little extra time, so we'll make those closing statements 3.5 minutes. We'll start with Mr. C.
Well, first of all, I'd like to very much express my appreciation to the sponsors of this event for providing the forum for Arch and myself to gather here and talk about issues. As we go through this campaign, I think the voters of West Virginia are going to realize there are a lot of basic differences between the two of us, although we may agree from time to time upon issues. I observed some time ago that my opponent says that very happily he's the same man that he was 10 years ago. And I think that's part of the problem. West Virginia is not the state it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we had lots of money coming in general revenues. 10 years ago, we had a lot of federal dollars coming in. Today, a lot of those revenues have stopped, and they haven't stopped because anyone in West Virginia has not been doing their job. They have stopped because of a national recession. And it's really difficult to do a lot of things when you don't have a lot of money. But for the future of West Virginia and my vision of West Virginia, I think if we're honest with the people of this state, we're going to have to use some imagination. We're going to have to use some creativity. We're going to have to realize that we're not going to be the smokestack industry that we have been in the past. We're going to have to reach out. Perhaps we need to look at gasification and liquefaction processes and facilities in southern West Virginia and northern West Virginia to put our unemployed coal miners back to work. Perhaps we need to put duty-free airports in Clarksburg and Charleston and Wheeling and Fairmont to take advantage of the empty warehouses and to take advantage of tourism, and again, to put our people back to work. And maybe we need to attract small binders, printing companies, other small businesses to provide services to this state which have historically been purchased elsewhere. If we don't do this, if we don't have some imagination, I think we're necessarily condemning the future generations of West Virginia, your children and mine, to a life of continued economic drudgery and instability in this thing we call the boom or bust cycle of West Virginia. But there, you know, is a myth in these mountains about my opponent, and as we go down the road, I'm going to punch some holes in that myth about how good economic times were, and that's the reason he got along so well, not because he did such a good job. And the one thing I want to promise the people of West Virginia is that I am not going to impose upon them the cruelest and meanest of all the taxes that could ever be. Arch is what I call the corruption tax. That hidden tax that distracts from the character, the integrity, and the pride of West Virginia. I won't settle any $100 million lawsuits for $1 million on my way out the door in the middle of the night. I won't have a liquor commissioner or other department head shaking down people for campaign contributions to further my political career. I won't pardon a lot of criminals and murderers which are not wanted on the street. I want to be governor of West Virginia. I love this state. I believe in this state. I believe in its potential. Again, thank you for having me here this evening.
And Mr. Moore, your closing statements.
I appreciate again the opportunity to participate in this debate. It gives West Virginians, I believe, pretty much the tenor of what they can look forward to in these months ahead. It really doesn't mean that you have a particular interest that is going to be paramount in anybody's mind. It's the hunger, the thirst, the idea to perhaps take advantage of whatever advantage there might be, to get away from the necessity of saying to you how you're going to put this state back together. I don't have to tell you that there is a difference in West Virginia. I responded to the question when somebody said that Arch Moore is not the same Arch Moore that he was 10 years ago. Well, I like to think, of course, that the aging process hasn't been as severe in many respects, but yet some of you may view me as though it has. But in terms of the state of West Virginia, my fellow West Virginians, it isn't anyways near like the state it was 10 years ago. We rank #1 in unemployment in this nation. Every time those statistics come out across this country, attention is drawn to the state of West Virginia, and it reinforces that image that people have, that there's something about the quality of life here, something about the people, something about the circumstances that leads us into this less than most positive reflection upon us. As you look at the state, when we look at our highway system, I'm always amazed that those suggest that those were good times. But ladies and gentlemen, you had to plan, you had to build those highways. The state had to have the money. The same statutes are on the books today. The same senators are there. I've often wondered why the same dramatics of improvement in those highway systems have not occurred. But the circumstances are also true in the field of education. We've moved out of a ranking of the mid-20s to the high 20s to the point where in a period of 7.5 years, we're close to the bottom. Yes, indeed, my fellow West Virginians, things have changed here. They're dramatically different today. It's going to take one whale of a guy to put it all back together.
On behalf of the West Virginia Associated Press broadcasters, we'd like to thank both of the candidates, Mr. Moore and Mr. See, for joining us this evening for the first live debate between the two gubernatorial candidates. Both of the candidates responded to questions during this debate concerning integrity, which has been brought up in this employment situation in this state. Also, both candidates talked about roads and ways in which to improve the roads in our state and the efficiency of the Department of Highways. They also addressed improving education in the state. Also, they talked about low self-esteem that many West Virginians seem to have. We also talked about tourism and if that much emphasis would be placed on tourism as was placed on it during the present administration. Right.
We have a number of people that we would like to thank for helping us put together this evening's event. We'd like to thank Jack Deacon and the folks on the technical side of things, a number of people at the Associated Press Bureau who have come through to help us, Clem Brosier, Wayne Davis, Andy Cattell, and all of the people from the Charleston Bureau of the Associated Press. Of course, we would like to thank both Mr. Archmore and Mr. Clyde C., their direct assistants or associates who have been working with us. That's Greg Houston with Mr. Moore, John Hoff with Mr. C. We couldn't have done it without any of these gentlemen. A number of people here at the Marriott who have helped us put it together, Steve Ludwig and some of the folks on his side. We have tried to provide a forum for both candidates, something that a service we have wanted to provide. The West Virginia Associated Press broadcasters have wanted to provide to the state. And regardless of the questions that came up and the things discussed this evening, we would like to applaud both the courage and the integrity of both candidates for coming forward and speaking and addressing the issues in the manner that they have this evening. We appreciate it, and our entire association appreciates it.
And we'd also like to thank you for joining us in this telecast and radiocast. We feel that it's important that the candidates come together and debate the issues in this campaign, and we thank you for joining us as well.
So from the Marriott in Charleston, the site of the West Virginia Associated Press Broadcasters 1984 convention, I'm Clint McElroy, president of the association, and for Lauren Tobia, we would like to thank you for joining us this evening.
Yeah, it is. Make sure they steal their news out.